Worlds heave beneath their enormity, their seemingly endless forms that peer in through the vast nothingness that makes up the Blind Eternities. They are creatures that defy reality and crumble the very fabric of planes upon which they visit. Devourers of life and mana, their purpose remains a mystery. What are they? What role do they serve in the multiverse? These are the Eldrazi Titans of Magic the Gathering. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Aether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today I want to answer a question often seen in the Vorthos community, a debate that rages fiercely at every LGS I've been to. Who is the greatest villain in MTG? There's certainly plenty of candidates for the title of greatest villain. It could be Nicol Bolas, Yawgmoth, or any blue control player, just to name a few. But I want to make the argument that the reigning best baddies in Magic has to be the Eldrazi Titans. In this video, I want to examine every aspect of the Eldrazi Titans, from their in-game cards to their lore, to determine why I believe they easily clear as the greatest villains in Magic the Gathering. Consider this the total and complete comprehensive history of the Eldrazi Titans. Before we begin though, I would ask if you're enjoying the content here at the Aether Hub to consider supporting the channel by throwing this video a like, sharing it with friends, and becoming a subscriber or member of the channel. It all goes a long way in helping our community grow. And now, let's get into the lore. The Blind Eternities, the harsh dimension between planes, is briefly traveled by planeswalkers. Living, organic things can only survive for mere moments before being vaporized by the energies that make up this vast nothingness. One of the most powerful and intellectual planeswalkers known to exist, the Elder Dragon Ugin, was able to push the limits of these moments. Driven by his unmatched curiosity, Ugin sought to understand this space between spaces. There he found living beings who he suspected to be ancient natives of the Blind Eternities themselves, who existed before the formation of the multiverse as we know it, capable, like planeswalkers, of traveling between planes. 3 of these beings were identified and given the names Ulamog, Kozilek, and Emrakul, the Eldrazi Titans. The Eldrazi are alien creatures whose true form exists in the Blind Eternities. Ugin explains that when they arrive on a plane, they manifest a small portion of themselves as a physical avatar, a shadow of living ether projected into a 3-dimensional space. If the inhabitants of a plane are fish, then the Eldrazi are but the hand of a great being reaching into the water, whose entirety cannot be fathomed by those below the surface. Or, at least, this is the metaphor Ugin used when he described the Eldrazi to other planeswalkers. All 3 of the Eldrazi manifest as Titans, enormous compared to the scale of the planes they visit, standing on a sea of tentacles where legs should be. Ulamog manifests as a body of bone and sinew, something like an exoskeleton covers a featureless head, extending down like the cheek guard of a warrior's helmet, but more reminiscent of mandibles. 2 purple arms reach out of a humanoid-esque abdomen, branching from the elbow into 4 clawed hands. Kozilek manifests as a humanoid abdomen covered in eyes. Its broad, chitin-plated shoulders hold what could be a giant eye where its head should be, possibly a lidless pupil crowned in strange, deep black plates floating above. Like Ulamog, it has 2 arms branching into 4 at the elbows. 2 ending in a clawed hand, and the other 2 ending in dagger-like plates, similar to those floating above his head. Emrakul manifests as the largest of the 3 Titans. She floats, finger-like tendrils reaching down from her tentacles, which are then woven into latticed flesh, like a web to form a sponge-like body that encases a purple glowing eye. Originally, Ugin suspected the Eldrazi Titans lacked what we typically note as intelligence. He believed they acted more as a force of nature, consuming and destroying solely as a biological response. Just as a tornado acts without malice, Ugin believed the Eldrazi to be incompatible to their concept of foresight. However, as more time was spent analyzing the Eldrazi and more planes experienced their wrath, it was learned there was much more to their intelligence than Ugin originally suspected. The Eldrazi are able to communicate with beings on the planes they've encountered. Some speculate that it's merely telepathy, but the planeswalker Jace Beleren believes that Emrakul has the ability to control all sentient beings, and that their communication is more akin to mind control. Some people have reported seeing visions when they're close to the Eldrazi, giving them hints to what the Eldrazi know and understand about a plane and its inhabitants. When Jace gets the rare opportunity to actually speak with Emrakul, it's a strenuous act for him. He sees visions that cause headaches. He's not sure how much is actually Emrakul speaking to him and how much is just his interpretation of this entire experience. Emrakul tells him that she cannot speak to living beings, not directly, but that their minds can adapt in an effort to comprehend her. This shows a level of planning and understanding previously unknown, meaning we're just now scratching the surface of the Eldrazi's intelligence. The Eldrazi are known for feeding on the planes they choose to visit. The manner in which they feed is quite unique. Consuming a plane of the mana builds it, leaving distinctive trails of destruction behind them. Ulamog is known as the Titan of Consumption, extracting the mana out of all things, leaving only the husk of what existed before that resembles coral or bone. Ulamog smells of sulfur and decay, but it's not known if the manifestation itself smells that way or if it's just the process of his consumption. Kozilek is known as the Titan of Distortion, warping reality and perception of both living and non-living things, leaving in their wake a geometric landscape of twisted destruction. The dark obsidian plates hovering over their body are thought to bend truth and reality, or possibly small holes, into the Blind Eternities. Emrakul is known as the Titan of Corruption, who reshapes all living things, creating life in her own way. These abominations hear the telepathic call of the Eldrazi and are twisted into a tentacled, latticed flesh image of Emrakul herself. The Eldrazi follow the ley lines of planes. It's not known if these paths of energy are used by the Eldrazi or if they are directly affected. Ley lines are like the veins of a plane, carrying its vast stores of mana throughout the world's body. It's believed that the ley lines are what originally tempts an Eldrazi Titan to this food source, as massive collections of mana are its prey. As an Eldrazi begins to feast on a plane, you can see its destructive paths follow the ley lines, as it traces over the most mana-rich segments of a world. When the mana level of a plane reaches unsustainable levels, the plane crumbles to nothing, and the Eldrazi move on to their next meal. The cycle, forever repeating. The way the Eldrazi Titans feed gives us a glimpse into the original proposed purpose for the Eldrazi and the overall makeup of the multiverse. Ugin believed that the Eldrazi could act as multiversal vultures. They were the cleaning crew of the multiverse. As more and more planes would spawn and be created across the multiverse, it's theorized that the Eldrazi Titans were there to balance things, to ensure the multiverse perhaps doesn't get too crowded, washing over older planes, absorbing their mana, and pruning them so that others could continue to be created. This, of course, is just a theory. All three of the Titans unleash Spawn, a weaker extension of themselves that break off and acts on the will of the Eldrazi Titan, like cells or appendages that can be reabsorbed. These are known as lineages, and physically resemble their progenitor, possessing some fraction of their power. There are drones, varied in appearance, seemingly dedicated to specific tasks like planting and hatching spawn, while others are made for combat. There are also spawns and scions. Smaller and less powerful than the drones, they often overpower their enemies with pure numbers, or act as troops for larger Eldrazi. Ulamog's lineages are made up of bone and muscle like their progenitor. Similar to Ulamog, there's a mask of bone plates where their face should be. Spawns too have arms split at the elbow and tentacles or arachnid legs, and leave behind white dust after they feed on the land. Their scions are worm or squid-like, with segments covered in bone plates that end in a mass of tentacles. The drones are larger and often tend to the spawn in the larval stage, or aid in feeding off the land. Kozilek's lineage often have space-warping crowns of obsidian over insect-like bodies. They can warp reality around them, and when they feed, they leave behind the same geometric patterns in the land. Kozilek's spawn are many-eyed, skittering creatures that imitate crabs or termites. Emrakul's lineage are colorful, most often purple, and possess a mass of tentacles weaving into lattice-like flesh. Some of them float above the ground. When feeding, they leave behind yellow dust over what seems to be living flesh. Their spawn have small, jointed legs and lattice spines. There have been 2 cards printed for each Eldrazi Titan, accurately portraying them as legendary and overwhelming. Ulamog, the Titan of Consumption, sucking the energy from living and non-living matter. He creates disease and plagues. His spawn resemble parasites. Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre, is an 11 mana 10/10, and like a plague on the stack, it destroys a target permanent. When this Titan resolves, he is an indestructible himself, and has an attack trigger of Annihilator 4, depicting its ability to consume the spoiled flesh on a corrupted plane. Annihilator is a common ability to be associated with the Eldrazi, which further depicts how destructive this race of aliens can be when they target a plane for consumption. If you manage to get Ulamog off the battlefield, he takes all the decaying cards in your graveyard with him, shuffling them back into your library like tilling the earth. Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger is a godlike 10 mana 10/10, just as Ugin explained, reaching down into a plane with a cast trigger allowing you to exile 2 target permanents, consuming the rot that is not fit to be recycled. Once Ulamog manifests on the battlefield, he marches forth on indestructible tentacles. When the Ceaseless Hunger attacks, he consumes all your opponents would ever know, exiling the top 20 cards of the defending player's library. Kozilek, Titan of Distortion, warps time, space, and reality, inverting what existed beforehand into something unrecognizable. Minds are twisted and loyalty shattered, leaving the plane's inhabitants to work with the Titan in destroying their own plane. Insanity and despair ensues since victims do not know what is real. The card Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, is a 10 mana 12/12 with a cast trigger that is certainly despair-inducing, drawing 4 cards while it's on the stack, even before the spell ever resolves into reality. Whether the Butcher enters the battlefield or not, you have gained more information in the form of card draw, which is associated with the flavor of seeking knowledge. Its second ability is Annihilator 4, a mechanic that encapsulates the destruction of the Eldrazi. Whenever Kozilek attacks, the defending player must experience the devastation of Zendikar and sacrifice 4 permanents. Their battlefields are laid to waste, and if Kozilek finds their way to their graveyard, they turn zones inside out, shuffling your graveyard into your library. The card Kozilek, the Great Distortion, has 2 colorless mana symbols in its casting cost, representing the colorless mana of the Eldrazi, beings not bound by the traditional mana sources found locked to planes, but rather the infinite colorless mana stored in the Blind Eternities. Like the first iteration of this character, it also lets you draw cards from a cast trigger, making sure you have 7 cards in hand. This works in tandem with its third ability, letting you discard a card with mana value X to counter a target spell with mana value X. The knowledge gained by drawing cards is converted into controlling what resolves, dictating the truth of the stack and the battlefield. The Great Distortion also has Menace, depicting that this intimidating 12/12 cannot be blocked by one measly chump alone. Emrakul, Titan of Corruption, takes life and twists it into something new with tentacles and woven spongy skin. The living beings affected are plunged into madness and become listless followers of Emrakul. The largest of the Eldrazi, Emrakul Aeon's Torn, is a 15 mana 15/15 that can't be countered. Her cast trigger allows you to take an extra turn, letting everyone know Emrakul is inevitable and unstoppable. She floats above the ground defying gravity, so her next ability is of course flying, but she also has protection from spells that are more than one color. The Eldrazi make use of colorless mana like no other, taking the complex energy from the ley lines and converting it to otherworldly power, dismantling the most evolved magic on the plane. With an ability like Annihilator 6, you understand the vastness of her presence, overshadowing everything that stands in her way. Aeon's Torn also shovels your graveyard into your library if she finds herself in that zone, continuing to build life out of death. Emrakul, the Promised End, is a 13 mana 13/13 that costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. When the Promised End is cast, you gain control of target opponent during their next turn, and that player takes an extra turn, driving your opponents mad and bending them to Emrakul's will. Flying, trample, and protection from instants shows that Emrakul cannot be killed, and why imprisoning the Eldrazi is one of the very few viable options for dealing with this threat. Long ago, 6,000 years before the Eldritch Moon stories, abominations overran Zendikar. The core lithomancer Nahiri called for help from her only friend and mentor, the vampire Soren Markov. When her spark ignited, he had taught her how to use and control her planeswalker power to protect her home plane. Now, she was being tested. As they stood with an encampment of refugees, they looked to the valley below to see the hordes of abominations stop and turn towards something monstrous. The hordes disseminate the camp, and the monstrous being unraveled the earth beneath them. Nahiri and Soren's only option was to planeswalk away, unable to save Zendikar or anyone else. As they rendezvoused somewhere else, another planeswalker appeared through the Aether, the ancient spirit dragon Ugin. He knew what was happening on Zendikar. Possibly being the wisest planeswalker in existence, he watched over the multiverse in an effort to bring balance. He tells Nahiri and Soren the information only he had the power to gather. This monstrosity was one of the Eldrazi, otherworldly beings that devour entire planes. Ugin believed that the Eldrazi should not be destroyed. They didn't know how the death of the Eldrazi would affect the multiverse or if it was right to kill them. Ugin instead suggested that they might be able to imprison them, using their physical forms as anchors to force them into dormancy. The three planeswalkers construct an underground chamber calling it the Eye of Ugin. It's surrounded by a Hedron network, floating rocks constructed by Nahiri, with a nexus inside linking them with all of the invisible ley lines of mana on Zendikar. They sealed this chamber with a magical lock, which pulled the Hedrons and surrounded the three Eldrazi. Ulamog, Kozilek, and Emrakul stood petrified, and soon the plane of Zendikar would devour them underneath its crust as it healed itself. It was like driving a stake through the hand that reached into the pond, trapping the projections of the unfathomable beings that existed in the Blind Eternities. They tested the lock to make sure it was strong enough. Only the three planeswalkers would be able to unlock the Hedrons, and Nahiri herself would stand watch over her home plane for all of eternity. Soren and Ugin agreed to return if their help was ever needed. Nahiri could activate a signal from the Eye of Ugin to call for them. Nahiri taught the inhabitants of Zendikar about the Eldrazi, helping them stomp out the remaining broodlings and maintaining the Hedron network without her. After many years, Nahiri tired of living and fell into a meditative state. Her teachings of the Eldrazi were passed down through the centuries, and stories of the Titans became distorted into the mythology of Zendikar's core and merfolk deities. Their horrific visages were morphed into attractive descriptions seen on cards like Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, and they were indeed worshipped. Their true identities were forgotten. While Nahiri slept, the tectonic plates of the Akum Mountains and the locked Hedrons shifted. Ulamog was able to influence the humans and core who lived near the Eye of Ugin, spreading an infectious madness. They began to perform rituals to their unseen god and created a temple near Ulamog's prison. This loosened the bonds of the Eye, allowing millions of spawn to pour out, attacking the cultists. The very few who survived were overcome with an insatiable bloodlust for destruction. They had become the Blood Chiefs, the progenitors of the vampire race on Zendikar. Nahiri awoke to find Zendikar once again teeming with Eldrazi brood and called for Soren and Ugin for aid. However, neither answered, and she had to reinforce the prison on her own. With the new vampires now free of Ulamog's influence, Nahiri leaves Zendikar and its denizens to deal with the remaining Eldrazi brood on their own. She had to find Soren and discover why he didn't come to her aid, and furthermore ask why there were now vampires on Zendikar when there weren't before, believing Soren may have corrupted some of her denizens. Years later, the pyromancer and planeswalker, Chandra Nalaar, had stolen the Dragon Scroll, which contained the spell for Ugin's signature Ghostfire Breath and a map of Zendikar. The planeswalker and mind mage Jace Beleren was hired to find Chandra and get the scroll back, as well as erase the memory of all who had seen it. Following the map of Zendikar and looking for various clues, they both arrived near the Eye of Ugin. Another planeswalker, the fanatical Sarkhan Vol, was also there on orders of Ugin's brother, Nicol Bolas. Sarkhan Vol had fallen into a delirious state, hearing voices calling him deeper into the Eye. When he meets Chandra, he uses his ability to turn into a dragon and attacks. When Jace arrives, he attempts to stop them, but the Hedrons absorb the power of all three. Chandra and Jace use the scroll containing Ugin's Ghostfire Breath to defeat Sarkhan, accidentally untying the knot of ley lines and unlocking the Eldrazi prison. Broodlings pour out of the Eye, threatening Zendikar once again. Nicobolus reveals to his pawn, Sarkon, that this was his plan to open the eye. That he wanted to release the Eldrazi simply to see how the multiverse would act in response to their enormous threat. A few years later, Sorin Markov comes back to Zendikar, this time fulfilling his pact, and teams up with the Elven Planeswalker, Nissa Ravane, who promises to help him seal up the Eldrazi prison. When they finally arrive, Nissa decides to shatter the Hedrons and release the Eldrazi Titans fully, hoping that they'd be grateful and leave Zendikar. Sorin was fed up with Nissa for not heeding his warnings and was tired of Zendikar creating its own problems, thus deciding to leave the plane to its own devices and its probable doom now that the 3 Eldrazi Titans had been fully released. The Planeswalker Gideon Jura arrives on Zendikar to find chaos. He wants to help the innocents of the plane and finally sees the Titans with his own eyes. Understanding that he needed help, he goes to Ravnica to find more Planeswalkers and recruits Jace Beleren. They go to Zendikar, arriving at the refuge of Seagate to find it already destroyed. The two help the survivors escape, and Gideon gathers defenders to take back the city from the Broodlings. As they begin to celebrate, they see a Titan on the horizon. Ulamog is coming. Jace travels to the Eye of Ugin, finding Ugin himself there rebuilding the prison. The dragon explains how the Eldrazi cannot be killed, and plans to rebuild the Hedron to lure the Titans within the range once more. Jace and Nissa, the latter among the survivors of Seagate, raised Hedrons and channeled the ley lines. Gideon, Chandra, and their troops would lure Ulamog within the range of the Hedrons and imprison him. However, a demon planeswalker, Obnixilis, arrived, searching for a way to reignite his spark. He saw the Hedron network and tried to siphon their energy, knocking them out of alignment and freeing Ulamog, then calls the second Eldrazi Titan, Kozilek, to Seagate, as Zendikar seems to be on the brink of collapse. On the verge of deciding whether or not to leave Zendikar to its fate, Gideon proposes that he, Jace, Nissa, and Chandra could hold the Titans at bay. It wasn't just about the Eldrazi, it was about protecting the multiverse from whatever threatened it. The 4 of them agreed to do whatever they could with their Planeswalker powers to help the multiverse, to stay and fight when they could easily just run away. They swore to keep watch. This was the foundation of the Gatewatch. Gideon and Chandra led 2 armies that merged and lured the 2 Titans into the circle of the Hedron network. Nissa calls upon the ley lines, knitting a glyph that lashed itself into the Titans. And as the gods try to escape, the glowing green lines hold fast. The Eldrazi fight back, sending their brood to attack, even pouring them down from the sky. But Nissa's glyph was working as Gideon and the troops defended her. The ley lines of Zendikar were eroding the 2 Titans, though this was breaking Zendikar as well. Its fate was now tied to the Eldrazi. Chandra stoked her flames as hot as she had ever tried before, and sent her fire up the lines of the glyph. The flame wasn't enough, but Nissa put a hand on her shoulder, channeling all of Zendikar's rage into Chandra. Now the Pyromancer was the nexus of Zendikar's power, and her flames ignited the ley lines. With a massive crack, the Titans broke, and the glyph was permanently burned into the ground. Hunks of charred Titan flesh rained down across Zendikar. It wasn't merely the avatars of the Titans defeated, but the Titans themselves. Despite Ugin's dire warnings about killing the Eldrazi Titans, Nissa's leyline magic had forcibly pulled the entirety of the Eldrazi Titans onto Zendikar. So, when they were overloaded with mana and Chandra's fire, these deaths seemed to be the true deaths of Ulamog and Kozilek. When Nahiri left Zendikar to find Sorin, she arrived on his home plane of Innistrad. At this point, she believed Zendikar to be lost to the Eldrazi Titans that Sorin seemingly ignored. Sorin explained that the Hell Vault, which he had made with pieces of moon silver to encase supernatural prisoners, might have absorbed her call for help. To Nahiri, Sorin seemed to hold no remorse for leaving helpless inhabitants of Zendikar to die. The two fought, and Sorin won, trapping Nahiri inside the Hell Vault. When Nahiri finally broke out, she returned to Zendikar only to find the Eldrazi had been freed. Looking over the decimation, she thought her friends had forsaken her and her plane and wanted her revenge. Had she stayed on Zendikar longer, she would have seen the eventual defeat of Ulamog and Kozilek. However, she went back to Innistrad and attacked Sorin's family at Markov Manor. She imprisoned the vampires there, encasing them in stone and leaving them in agony. She formed cryptoliths that distorted the energy of the plane's ley lines and summoned Emrakul to lay waste to Innistrad the way Sorin led Ulamog and Kozilek lay waste to Zendikar. Emrakul arrives at the temple built for her in the Nephalia Drownyard. twisting Innistrad into madness, turning its inhabitants into mindless tentacled monsters bent to only her will. Sorin gathered other families of vampires to take down Nahiri, and while they severely wounded her, she was able to trap Sorin in stone, forcing him to watch as Emrakul destroyed his world. Jace Beleren hears that something is affecting the residents of Innistrad and goes there to investigate. Strange mutations were being found. Tentacles and eyes were sprouting from people's bodies. The angels who were charged with protecting the plane were driven mad and began to wipe out humans. Jace arrived at Markov Manor to find hundreds of dead vampires. He noticed one clutching a book, the journal of another planeswalker, Tamiyo. Jace read the journal's entries describing how the energy of the plane had been warped and realizes that this is how the angels were affected. He found the cryptoliths that were redirecting the ley lines to the Drowneyard Temple were being built by zombies, and worshipped by the people there was their god, this Eldritch deity. When Emrakul arrives on Innistrad, she strains the plane's sanity. With no spawn following her, she mutated Innistrad's inhabitants instead, and warped the ones affected earlier beyond recognition. Werewolves and the Stromkirk family of vampires fall under her influence. The entire village of Hanware is morphed into a singularly towering Eldrazi spawn. Two archangels, Gisela and Bruna, were driven mad before Emrakul's arrival and fused together to form Brisella, Voice of Nightmares, to lead the angels-turned-drones against the plane. Undead, however, are immune to Emrakul's influence, making the necromancer Liliana Vess effective in directing her hordes against Eldrazi spawn. Nahiri then leaves Innistrad, satisfied with her work. Those who resisted Emrakul's influence fought back: the Order of Saint Traft, the Voldaren family vampires, and Sigarda, the only angel left unaffected by madness. Jace assembled the Gatewatch, and they planned to trap Emrakul the same way they had trapped Ulamog and Kozilek on Zendikar. Jace cast a protective barrier around them to stave away madness, but as Liliana grew tired, Emrakul was able to fight back. Emrakul strains against the barrier and speaks to Jace in his mind. The Moonfolk planeswalker Tamiyo arrives. She's the author of the journal Jace found at Markov Manor. She explains that the Hell Vault was made of moonsilver, which was capable of holding much more than just demons. Its unique composition was able to contain anything not natively found on Innistrad. During the Battle of Thraben, Jace finds himself in an illusion that resembles his sanctum on Ravnica. He climbs the stairs, seeing visions of his friends in each window. Then, finally he reaches a vision depicting an angel with a cloaked face. He'd seen this angel before. He thought it was Emeria, the merfolk god created in the likeness of Emrakul. She speaks to Jace's mind, asking him to succumb to surreality. She was researching, trying to understand something and writing in a scroll. Quote, "This is all wrong. I am incomplete, unfulfilled. There should be blossoms, not barren resentment. The soil wasn't receptive. It is not my time. Not yet," Emrakul murmurs. Emrakul invites Jace to play a game of chess, communicating telepathically that the only reason they can converse is because that his mind was very adaptable. Quote, "I was personified a long time ago. Forces cannot be reasoned with. Agency does not exist in propagating waves. If you take shortcuts to try and grapple with what you cannot perceive, cannot comprehend, who am I to gainsay? No one. You, perhaps," the angel says to Jace inside his mind. Then Jace understood this wasn't Emeria or Emrakul exactly, but his mind's attempt to comprehend whatever he was feeling from Emrakul's power. He had to personify it to make sense of it. Jace wins the chess match and the angel lowered her hood, looking exactly like an Emeria statue he'd seen on Zendikar. The chess pieces start to come to life, and writhe, and attack. Jace's king is toppled by his own pieces. When Jace told her that she couldn't do that he had already won, Emrakul told that all of the pieces were hers. Emeria's face began to melt, dissipating into purple smoke. The voice still spoke, telling Jace she was coming, and Jace tries to escape. Outside of the vision, Emrakul is hovering over the city of Thraben, mentally assaulting those below. The Planeswalkers need to work together to trap Emrakul inside the moon with the pieces of the Hell Vault. They find Emrakul was too vast to burn like they did to the other two Titans, so they form a plan to trap her in the moon with Tamiyo's powerful binding spell. Jace had to bind the glyph to the personification of Emrakul. Tamiyo read from a scroll with iron bands, like the one Jace had seen Emeria writing in. A silver beam struck Emrakul and enveloped the large mass of her body, pulling it in. Emrakul folded, collapsed impossibly, the light winked out, and she was gone. A glyph appeared in the moon like a scar. Tamiyo later says, though it was her power that imprisoned Emrakul, the Titan had in fact taken over her body, making her cast the spell on the scroll, a scroll that she had never seen before. The scroll she read was supposed to destroy the plane, but instead it powered the spell that trapped the Eldrazi. Tamiyo spoke to how everyone was trying to survive, to prolong their story at whatever cost. But what if they were all just a part of Emrakul's story, in service of some awful destiny? Just as she had said to Jace, they were all Emrakul's chess pieces. The two planeswalkers were left to wonder if they had actually won. In the entire history of the Eldrazi, we only have one example of direct communication between the Titans and other characters, as Emrakul has a mental conversation with Jace Beleren near the end of Eldritch Moon. From this encounter, there's a lot to digest, but clearly Emrakul herself has laid the seeds for her own return. Though we cannot comprehend fully Emrakul's desires and goals, she does seem to think that the worlds she visits and devours should welcome her arrival. Innistrad was not as receptive as she believed it should be. This shows the Eldrazi, or at least Emrakul, is self-aware. Though the world was, in her words, barren and resentful when it showed blossoms, seems to be counterintuitive to the very natures of the Eldrazi themselves, as it is they who make plains barren with their consumption. The lines that point us towards her return is that she admits that she isn't ready, that she's not complete. What a complete Eldrazi Titan might look like, we can only speculate. But, as we know her purpose is to be welcomed by the worlds they destroy, it could very well be very terrifying. As we believe that Emrakul allowed herself to be trapped within Innistrad's moon, some, including myself, have speculated on what may be happening to this Titan. One theory is that Emrakul is in fact a newer form of Eldrazi Titan, not born at the dawn of the multiverse, but later evolved to be more intelligent than her predecessors. It's why Emrakul is so different when compared to Ulamog and Kozilek, why she ventured off rather than feasting on Zendikar once released. To me, Emrakul may still be growing, both physically and mentally, almost like she's still young, comparatively. Perhaps being trapped in the moon is like being encased in a cocoon, giving Emrakul the chance to grow while feeding on the latent mana locked within the unique silver material of Innistrad's moon. Who knows what may break forth when Emrakul does feel ready, when she is complete, but it will be a dark day for the multiverse when the Eldrazi return. While Ugin was somewhat certain that the three Eldrazi Titans that we know of might be the only of their kind, that hasn't stopped other curious thinkers of the multiverse from finding clues of others of this brood seen in Magic the Gathering, yet to be revealed as Eldrazi. Some have speculated on the possibility of other Eldrazi in MTG lore. Merit Lodge is an avatar that takes the form of a monstrous kraken, which is thought to be her true form that she cannot change. She is centuries old and able to travel between planes, but is not a planeswalker. She has the same Lovecraftian horror flavor as the Eldrazi, and though her power is destructive, she doesn't seem to consume planes. She wants to be worshipped as a god and can whisper to the minds of people, willing them to start cults in her name, similar to what Emrakul did on Innistrad. Cultists are mutated in her likeness, with lots of eyes, teeth, and tendrils, but are single-minded like the followers of the Eldrazi. These cultists are like beacons summoning her to planes. It's possible they power her interplanar travel and are the reason she wants followers to begin with. The undead do seem to serve Merit Lodge, where Emrakul has no power over them, so Merit Lodge could just be a more powerful version of these Eldrazi Titans, or maybe she's something else entirely. While the three Eldrazi Titans are the only ones confirmed at the moment, that's not to say that powerful scions of their brood can't also reach legendary status on their own. As manifestations of their will and extensions of their bodies, scions can come in all shapes and sizes and vary wildly in power levels. We already talked about a few other legendary Eldrazi in the story segment of this video, but those were all creations of the Titans, not beings tied to them directly. These were legendary creatures twisted into thralls of the Eldrazi, not Eldrazi as we properly know them. This makes sense though, as the spawn of the Eldrazi are just pieces of the Titans themselves. So why would they become named legendaries when in reality they're merely just cells of the greater Titan? This pattern, however, has broken with the release of Commander Masters and the birth of a new legendary Eldrazi creature, Zuladak, Voidgorger. This powerful new Eldrazi commander is an Eldrazi lover's perfect gift. A huge colorless monster who loves it when you cast other huge colorless monsters. With Cascade, your Eldrazi cards give you even more Eldrazi cards. The Eldrazi are definitely a consideration for strongest villains in the Magic the Gathering story. The Titans are the only known creatures able to live in the Blind Eternities. They're impossible to fully comprehend, making it difficult to know how to defeat them. Even when people figure it out, they have to convince the entire masses of a plane to essentially stand any chance of succeeding against the Eldrazi. They can listen to people's minds, communicate telepathically, and control people, twisting them into willing thralls. Eldrazi can travel between planes easily, and nobody knows for sure why they might go to a particular plane at any point. That is, unless you can coax them there by some large source of mana. We can compare the Eldrazi threat with other big bads we've had in Magic's storied past to see how they stack up in the realm of villainry. Eldrazi to me have a larger scope than one like Nicol Bolas, the Elder Dragon Planeswalker who strives to be an omnipotent agent of chaos. Nicol Bolas was the mind who orchestrated the Titans' original release. He obviously didn't believe they posed a great threat to himself, but instead used the Eldrazi as a means to see how the multiverse would stand up against an all-consuming threat, a mantle he would later take on. While Bolas' power cannot be understated, he's still plagued with personality traits that would always lead to his eventual downfall. In releasing the Eldrazi and spurring the creation of the Gatewatch, he ensured his ultimate plans of becoming a god would fail. Greed and the desire for more power, the folly of all would-be tyrants, is not something the Eldrazi possess. One of the other strongest analogs to the Eldrazi in MTG lore is Phyrexia. Phyrexia resembles the Eldrazi in art, depicting similar builds and behavior, and they share a similar hive mind, collectivist ideology. A lot of Phyrexianized creatures look like Ulamog, showing bone and sinew. Phyrexians have their own broodlings and spawn. These spawns all answer to the One, the leading compulsion to further the spread of Phyrexia. Phyrexians are all one hive mind with collective memories, like Emrakul's servants seem to be when she invaded Innistrad. Where I feel the Eldrazi have the upper hand is, again, individual traits are totally extinguished within the broods of the Titans, while those Phyrexians of New Phyrexia only appear single-minded on the surface. Clearly, with the fall of Elesh Norn, who was driven off purpose by her own fears, Phyrexians aren't nearly as uniformed as we once thought. This cannot be said about the Eldrazi though, who are for all intents and purposes, one being following one goal with no true divergence. While some Titans may have fallen, Emrakul still rides inside the moon of Innistrad, waiting, as all these other major threats have come and gone. The Eldrazi remain a permanent fixture within the multiverse. And there you guys go, the complete and comprehensive history of the Eldrazi in Magic the Gathering. Certainly these strange monsters are some of the greatest villains presented in the story, a driving narrative and threat that breaks our conception of what a villain is. Not always does a villain have to be an evil dragon or conniving mastermind. Sometimes the greatest threat is the unfailing nature of the multiverse itself. And that, in reality, is what the Eldrazi represent in Magic the Gathering. Now I want to know your own thoughts in the comments below. Do you like the Eldrazi in MTG? As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave it a like, share it with friends, and become a subscriber. It all goes a long way in helping the channel grow. And until next time, guys, see ya!